Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to Preston Cornish for inviting me this evening. When Preston invited me a couple of weeks ago, he said it was going to be sort of an exposition on policy goals that conservatives and libertarians should pursue in 2014. And I saw that kind of evolving over the last couple of weeks to being kind of a debate between conservatives and libertarians until it kind of reached a climax today where I saw it being promoted as a boxing match where somebody was going to be left bloody and drooling on the floor by the end. So in times like that, I think that, well, I can rely on my charisma and good looks to carry me through, but then my subsequent thought is this is not going to end well for me. So we'll see what we can do. But I think one thing that conservatives should focus on in 2014 is increasing their number in Congress. Right now, I think conservatives hold about 14 to 18% of the United States House. You always see commentators, liberals and establishment Republicans, talking about how much dysfunction there is in Washington because conservatives vote against everything and they cause so many problems. But how many conservatives are there? You can look at any number of metrics, but look at the Ryan Murray budget where they removed the sequestration caps. 62 Republicans voted against that, 14% of the House. You could look at the Mark Meadows letter calling for Obamacare to be defunded. 80 Republicans in the House signed that, 18%. So whatever metric you use, you aren't going to reach a figure above 20% of the House being conservative, and yet establishment Republicans and liberals say that conservatives are starting to dominate Washington and cause all of this dysfunction. Imagine what they could do if they reached, say, 25% of Congress. So I think Republicans or conservatives should focus on building their numbers in the next election, and I think they're well established to do that. You have conservatives across the nation running against establishment incumbents. You have Matt Bevin in Kentucky. You have Milton Wolfe in Kansas. You have Chris McDaniel in Mississippi. You have a lot of good conservative challengers that we can get into office if conservatives support them. And frankly, establishment Republicans don't do very well. They have a lot of personal problems that conservatives don't have. You look at Trey Riddell, the Florida congressman who was snorting cocaine. You have Pete Sessions, the chairman of the House Rules Committee, who's rumored to have improper relationships with members of his staff. You have Renee Elmers of North Carolina. You have Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Whip, who are also purportedly having inappropriate relationships with other members of Congress. Establishment Republicans have a lot of problems. And need anyone bring up Chris Christie? I saw somebody said earlier today that if we keep investigating Chris Christie, pretty soon we're going to start finding all of the pictures that he's been sending of himself to women. We don't want to see that. But this is the kind of stuff that establishment Republicans end up engaging in. Conservatives, they don't do it. You look at Ron Paul, he's been married for 56 years. Justin Amash met his wife when he was 15 years old in high school. Conservatives don't have these personal problems. So conservatives are well positioned to make gains because they do so much better in a lot of respects, and they need to keep doing that. They need to keep aspiring to a higher standard than the establishment Republicans do. If you want to do cocaine and engage in relationships with your interns, you can participate in the movement. There are a lot of lobbying firms in Washington where you'd be a good cultural fit. But as a conservative, conservatives, we need to aspire to a higher standard, and we need to pick up more seats. Second point on policy, conservatives need to propose legislation that unites Republicans and divides Democrats. Boehner has a very difficult time doing that. For example, something they should not take up this year is immigration. It will divide the Republican Party. It will unite Democrats. Mike Needham of Heritage Action has suggested that that should be tabled until 2017 when Republicans have a stronger majority, and that's a great point. That isn't the route Boehner is taking us on. They should not focus on gay marriage. Regardless of the moral merit of either side of the issue, it's not a good issue for Republicans to take up this year. 32 states, by popular vote, have prohibited gay marriage. 8 states, by legislative vote, have allowed it. 3 states, by popular vote. That's a difference of 32 to 11. And at the same time, 58% of Americans support gay marriage. More than 80% of voters under 30 support gay marriage. There is no way that Republicans can win on this issue this year. It isn't something they should take up. What they should take up instead, for example, is gun control that unites Republicans, except for John McCain and Pat Toomey, and it divides Democrats. Obama issued an executive order last year that essentially said Obamacare did allow for doctors to ask if you owned a gun. Republicans could take steps, legislative steps, to disrupt that executive order. Things like that, legislative proposals like that, would divide the Democratic Party while uniting Republicans. And House leadership really needs to learn how to do that. Because frankly, if you rely on the good looks of John McCain or the charisma of Mitt Romney to win elections, it's not going to be enough. You need to have better policies that unite the party. And the third point on messaging is that conservatives need to dispel the myth of partisanship. Establishment Republicans and Democrats love to talk about how partisan Washington is because of the Tea Party. And it's like peeing in navy blue pants. It's warm and it makes you feel good, but nobody can see it. It makes these liberals feel good to talk about how partisan Washington is, but when you get into the minutiae or the details, you really can't find the partisanship. Norm Ornstein of AEI and Thomas Mann of Brookings wrote a book about it called It's Even Worse Than It Looks. Senator Harkin called it dangerous. He said that conservatives and libertarians were a small group of willful men and women of a certain ideology, and said that they had made Washington very dangerous, every bit as dangerous as the breakup of the Union before the Civil War. But where is the partisanship? Look at this past summer when Republicans worked with the Democrats on Obamacare. For example, does anybody remember Boehner's chief of staff, Mike Summers, in his conversation with Harry Reid's chief of staff, David Crone? They had an email exchange debating how to make sure that members of Congress retained their subsidies under Obamacare. And in the wording from Mike Summers, Boehner's chief of staff, he said, "We can't let it get out there that this is for Boehner and Reid to ask the president to carve us out of the requirement for Obamacare." They wanted to keep it a secret. But then Republicans did something else in public, different from what they were doing in private, and Democrats, angry at that hypocrisy, leaked that email exchange. And because of that, we get to know about it. They're very bipartisan, but they say one thing and they do another. NSA is another issue where they've been very bipartisan. When Justin Amash proposed an amendment defunding one NSA program, 134 Republicans and 83 Democrats voted against Amash. There is a lot of bipartisanship for growing the size of government. Look at foreign intervention. President Obama wanted to take action in Syria. 64% of the American public opposed it. So what did John Boehner do? He sided with Obama. There is a great degree of bipartisanship on issues that are unpopular with the American public. And really, look no farther than the national debt. It was $6 trillion in 2003. Today, it is more than $17 trillion. There's a lot of bipartisanship and a lot of cooperation for growing the size of government. And I think that this is a message that conservatives really need to become more cognizant of, because I think it's a very dangerous message that the American public will react to. If they believe that one side is being more partisan, it's not going to go well for conservatives. Conservatives need to point out why liberals and establishment Republicans are very bipartisan and why it's hurting America. So the bottom line is that Republicans and conservatives need to focus on liberty for all, not liberty for some. Everybody talks about decreasing the size of government, but when it comes time to actually do it, their actions don't always match their words. And if they do that, they can increase their strength in Congress, and they're going to do better in the future than they've been doing for the last few years.